Welcome to the Schuby Show, where Carson Schubert interviews national and local sports personalities and more. Now, please be seated and get ready for some more never-ending nonsense with yours truly, Schuby.
This is the Schuby Show with yours truly, Carson Schubert. Today on the show, we are joined by the voice and a writer of the Burlington Royals, which is an affiliate of the Kansas City Royals, and he just got a new job as well, and that is Alex Feuz. And Alex, first of all, I want to welcome you to the podcast today, and I also want to hear a little bit about your new gig, but first of all, how are you doing?
I'm hanging in there. Thanks for having me on your show today, Carson. So yesterday was my first day back at 104.5 ESPN Radio here in upstate New York, Albany area. I interned there back I was a junior in high school when I interned there, and now I'm back doing like a digital correspondent kind of project there this summer that I'm really excited about. It's a cool thing that we're doing over there, and I've always loved to write, and I haven't really had the opportunity to write on a platform. And, I'll be writing 5 to 7 articles a week over there, and I'm really excited about that.
There you go, and that's very good to be able to get a kind of job like that during this pandemic that we've had going on. It's kind of been few and far between kind of for job searching right now for many people. So very good that you're able to get that. And obviously the minor league baseball season hasn't happened either, so I'm sure it'll be nice to have something for you to do.
Right. No, and that's the thinking. And what the beauty behind this kind of project is, it's a digital correspondent position. So I'm not going into the station every single day. I'm working from home. So let's say, Carson, I get a phone call tomorrow telling that there's going to be some form of minor league baseball season, and I have to be down in Burlington, North Carolina tomorrow. I'm going to Burlington, but I can still do the things I would have done at the radio station no matter where I am in the country or the world. So that's the beauty behind this, because I made sure I didn't want to, weekend, who knows? You can't really predict the future. So a weekend, I just didn't want to be put in the position of either having to choose one or the other, because it would have to be Burlington, because I said yes to them first, obviously. So I always made sure that I could do both, and I can. And that's the beauty of this one.
There you go. That's a great thing to have. A lot of jobs now kind of are that way, especially with the pandemic going on. Alex, I was also going to, before we get into more of what you do, I was going to ask you, how has your dad been doing since coming home from the hospital?
He's been hanging in there. He's definitely improved a lot. Thanks for asking, of course. It's been a challenging few months, because he was diagnosed with stage 2 pancreatic cancer the week of, or the day before, sports were put on pause. So it was kind of like our world and our home was put on pause. And then the next day, the whole world was put on pause. So it's definitely been an interesting last few months. It's been, you always have to find the silver linings and everything, Carson. And I've been so incredibly blessed to be able to spend the last 3 months home with them. And that's been amazing. And it's 3 months I never thought I would have had with them. I was supposed to be in North Carolina 2 weeks ago for the whole summer. And I would have had to gone straight back to school in September, not coming back home and seeing them. So this is like, I guess, borrowed time spending with them in a way that I would have never had. There was still 2 months left of school. And then there was, I would have been home for 2 weeks to see them. But instead, I'm home all this time and spending time with him, taking him to doctor's appointments and stuff like that. So I've been incredibly lucky with that way. So that's definitely been the positive out of this. And he is definitely getting better, and it's been nice to be able to spend this time with him.
Absolutely. We'll definitely be keeping you in our thoughts and prayers during this time as he continues to battle and hopefully beat cancer. And during this pandemic, as you said, kind of makes things even worse, especially with no sports around, not any kind of way to get away from
Right.
from all the things.
He's been watching a lot of game shows.
There you go.
Every time I go downstairs or enter the living room, it's always the Game Show Network. So
there you go. That hopefully will help the pain of no sports and help him to not worry about the battle that he's dealing with as well. So, Alex, on a little bit brighter side of things, you also are the host of the Whole Story podcast, where you have interviewed multiple big names in the sports industry, including the likes of Bob Costas, Adam Schefter, and other broadcasters as well. Tell us a little bit about how you got started with this podcast. I believe it was during the pandemic when it started, right?
Yeah, so it was interesting. So the new Whole Story podcast started during the pandemic, during quarantine. But if you go back, the show started back in January. It was during winter break where I did the first 4 episodes with Emily Walden, Jessica Kleinsmith, Danny Vietti, and Jesse Agler of the Padres. So that was the first 4 episodes. And then I went back to school and I got busy with everything at school. Plus, I was doing, my radio show every single morning and things like that. So I was still getting my reps. I was happy. And the Whole Story podcast was just something I could just do on the side. And then during quarantine, when I was basically locked in my home for a few weeks and couldn't leave, I'm not the type of person that can just sit still. And I decided that, I was going to ramp this back up. I think the first episode back was with Ken, and he's great. And, after that, you just start getting the ball rolling. And each week I try to at least do 3 episodes. It's been so much fun just getting the chance to talk with some of the people that I look up to, some of my friends in the industry. And it's been such a fun project to work on during these crazy times.
What would you say is your favorite part of doing this podcast? Obviously meeting a lot of really awesome sports personalities, but what else goes into that, and what do you enjoy most about the interviews that you've done so far?
Yeah, I think just what I enjoy most out of it is just getting the chance to do long-form interviews, to hear the stories. I think what the catchphrase or the slogan behind it is like the stories behind the breaking news. That's kind of my favorite part here, is to hear the stories, get to understand a little about what makes these broadcasters tick inside of them, right? Because I think about this all the time, like what makes me tick as a broadcaster? And that's really been one of the coolest things. And especially to hear how they've gotten into this industry, how they've grown in this industry as well. Hearing Adam Schefter say, after I graduated from college, I couldn't find a job for 2 years. And now looking at it, now Schefter's followed by over 7 million people on Twitter, and he's one of the most prominent sports insiders in the history of sports media. And he couldn't find a job for 2 years after college. So it's hearing those kinds of stories that get me excited, because it inspires me. And I hope it inspires someone that's listening to the show that, wait a second, I can't be that hard on myself, because some of the best people in the industry, what a lot of people think is that Schefter, right out of school, went to ESPN and made it big time. But they don't see that every single major, either sports broadcaster or insider they didn't start with the company that they're at or just right at the start. They had to, Ken Rosenthal started it on a small paper, local paper in Baltimore. And, you can go down on the list of, while yes, some of these, you might have a quicker path, but, there's more to it. I guess that's my point.
You also, as we mentioned, the Burlington Royals, we talked about that a little bit. This was going to be your first year with the Burlington Royals, is that correct?
Yeah, it would have been my first year of calling professional baseball. So, it's unfortunate, but at the end of the day, you couldn't have predicted it. So,
Right.
and, everyone's affected by this. So, while it is unfortunate that, it looks like there is going to be no minor league baseball season, just the pure logistics of it. But I still have hope that there might be a season. You never know. But still, it is unfortunate. But again, we'll see what happens, right?
That's right. We can only wait and see what happens. We are not in control of things, as we have been fully aware of these last couple of months here.
Mm-hmm.
So,
100%.
So, Alex, a question other than your podcast, obviously, that you've been doing a really good job with. What else have you been up to during this quarantine to keep yourself busy? As you said, you're kind of a guy that can't really sit still for too long. So, what have
Yeah.
you been up to during quarantine to keep yourself busy?
Well, it's funny because a couple of things. So when I got home during spring break, I worked at an ice cream place the last 4 years. I started working there in high school. And it's this, it's like a local owned ice cream place, Curry Freeze. And it's one of our most popular. Everyone goes there in our hometown almost every single night. It's crazy busy. It's one of our most popular. And I started working there. We opened on St. Patrick's Day, but we had to close right after. And we reopened at the last week of April. And I've been there almost every single day of the week at night since we've reopened back in April. So we've almost been open for 2 months already. And I've been over there almost every single day. So that's what I've been doing to stay busy. I work almost 40 hours a week over there. So I work 6 days a week at the ice cream place. And I also live on a hay farm. And hay season is beginning this week. So that's going to keep me busy in the morning. So, like I said, I do like to stay busy. Anyone that knows me knows that. So I've been doing okay. There was 2 to 3 weeks where I didn't leave the house at all, and I hated it. But I did it because I had to stay safe, and obviously for reasons, during a pandemic that we've never witnessed in history, in our history anyways. So that's what I've been doing. But now I'm getting back to my crazy schedules of trying to stay busy. My friends always tell me that I'm crazy of how crazy my days are because I just can't say no sometimes. But I love to stay busy. I love it.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of an interview I had with Brett Dolan a few weeks ago. He kind of said the same thing. He had been so busy with broadcasting for so long during the summer, during the winter, and during the spring and fall, of course, as well. Now, when the pandemic started, he was so bored and he was so used to being on the go constantly that he just didn't know what to do with himself. And he finally kind of started doing some reading and different things, and now finally did some college announcing tournament down in Texas that they had. He was very excited to get going on that because, honestly, as broadcasters who go a lot and want to watch sports and enjoy sports, it's a very tough thing to try and get out of that routine and get into I got to stay at home routine.
Hmm. Yeah, no, it's insane. And most of these, you ask any, especially with baseball broadcaster right now, would have started almost close to 2 months ago now, or over 2 months ago now. they're traveling. It's every day. Basically, you're traveling, and then you're not. 1 year, you look at the John Sterlings of the world who, has been broadcasting baseball games for over 30 years. You're traveling constantly all those 30 years, and then the 1 year that you're preparing for baseball, you're down in Florida at spring training, and then you have to return home, and we don't know when baseball is going to come back, right? That's shocking to a lot of, John Sterling, who's 80 years old or so. That's like a shock to the system in a way. Like, what do? You've done one thing for the last 30 years consistently, and then it's just not there anymore. So I feel not bad, but I feel for some of these people that just, it's huge. It can affect you mentally too. It's scary stuff if you dwell on it too, because like I said earlier, you can't control any of this. It's in no one's control. I guess the only thing that is in your control is how you deal with it. It's up to you to kind of decide, okay, I'm not just going to sit around, and sit on my hands, and I'm going to do something productive. Whatever that productive is, that's up to you to decide. If you feel like if you need to feel productive, and by feeling productive, you have to do something in broadcasting, well, then make a podcast. Sit down with some of your friends, call them up and hit the record button, or play Stratomatic Baseball, which I love, or playing MLB The Show and broadcasting those games on Twitch. Whatever you need to do to feel productive, do it. And you'll feel a lot better at night. You really will.
That's for sure. And now, Alex, kind of backtracking, we've talked a lot about what you've been doing currently, but now let's talk about your career and how you got interested in broadcasting and just sports in general. So we'll start with the sports side of things. Alex, how did you get involved with sports, and when did your love of sports begin?
Well, I guess you could say my love for sports started later in life than, honestly, any broadcaster and any sports fan. So I actually hated sports up until I was around 12 or 13. I had no interest in them. And I was grounded for 2 weeks in the 7th grade, and I couldn't watch any TV. And so I turned on my radio, and I started listening to John Sterling and Susan Wallman call Yankee games. And after that, I fell in love with baseball, and then I watched every single Yankee game, listening to Sterling and Susan call the game, and I would listen to Michael Kay and John Flaherty, David Cohn, and Jack Curry of the S Network, and Nancy Newman, and Chris Sherman. Everyone from the S Network I love, and WFAN. And then as soon as that baseball season ended, I said, okay, well, now that baseball is gone, I need something else to fill that void. So I, started listening to, watching basketball and the NFL and the NHL. And then once baseball came back around, I started even gearing up even more and loving it even more. And then I would say about a year, and that's when I started doing the podcast. It was 6 years ago last week I started, podcasting and shows and stuff along the lines of that. So it's been 6 years since I've had a podcast, and it's been such an incredible journey. It's one that I never thought would have happened, to be completely honest with you, Carson, because it's one that I just, it kind of just happened out of nowhere. So it's been interesting, but it's one that it's been a fun one for sure.
Yeah, I think that's how a lot of podcasts really take off, is just one simple idea and you kind of run with it. And it's definitely something that we as broadcasters want to be able to kind of expand our careers a little bit too. Kind of a way to build your own brand platform, kind of a way to do that, kind of get a little bit more national attention instead of just doing games. Because if you start out small doing games, you're not going to get as well known if you would do a podcast, potentially, depending on where you're located and stuff too. But yeah, it's a really good way to kind of get your name out there a little bit and also get some really good stories from people. As you've mentioned, one of the loves that you have of podcasting is the stories from people. And I think that's one of the best things about it as well, just hearing people's stories and how they got started in their career.
100%. And, I don't like to fanboy over anyone, but, last week was the first time I ever got to talk with Susan Wallman of the Yankees. And that was just such a cool experience because, like I said, I honestly don't think I would have gotten or really fell in love with anything related to sports if it wasn't for John and Susan calling the Yankee games. And I don't know if you ever heard them call games and broadcasts, but they are two of the most fun people to listen to because John is John. He's just entertaining to listen to. And it's been just such a, incredible ride to be able to get to talk to some of my, childhood heroes in a way. So those are the things that I just love about this too, is just getting the chance to talk with them and hear about their journey in the industry.
And so you mentioned your love for sports kind of happened when you were 12 or 13 years old. Kind of got into the podcasting side of things shortly after that. But then when did you actually figure that you wanted to be in the sports industry for a career?
I think it started, that's a good question. I don't think I think I just kept doing it. It just happened. I don't think there was ever really one moment where I thought, okay, this is really what I want to do. I just kept doing it, and I never stopped enjoying it. I think if the first true moment where I solidified my idea, or I guess theory behind me getting in the sports media, would be when there was a sports broadcasting camp at Dean College. I went there one summer. John Rook, who's the voice of the Patriots, ran the sports broadcasting camp. And over there, we got to go to the Patriots training camp and got to go to a Paw Sox game and broadcast one of those games, interview some of the players beforehand during that sports camp. And it was really at that point, I'm like, yes, this is what I want to do. I love doing this. It was exciting every single day. So I think it was right around that time where I realized, okay, this is what I want to do. This is what I enjoy doing. This is fun for me to do. So I think it was right around that time where I was testing the waters to see, okay, is this truly what I want to do, or do I go down a different route? So I think right around that time, and I would have been going into 11th grade at that time in high school. And then right after that summer camp, I got my internship at ESPN Radio up here in Albany. And that's kind of where the whole ball started to get rolling.
Very cool. And you've been able to continue that with your work at the school, Dean College, as you said, and of course now with the Burlington Royals. Eventually, when we do get a baseball season, it might not be till next year, unfortunately, but hopefully we'll get there eventually. And then, of course, as the digital correspondent for 104.5, The Team, out of upstate New York, as you mentioned, as well. Alex, one question I had for you about the podcast that you're doing. If there is one person that you haven't been able to interview yet that you would really want to interview, who would that be?
This is one, I've been so incredibly blessed with just having so many incredible people on the podcast, but I would say there's 2 or 3 people that are still on the top of my list. I know you only asked for one, but the top 3 people are probably the top 3 best in sports. Number 1 would be, in no particular order, Colin Cowherd, Scott Van Pelt, and Rich Eisen. All 3 incredible people, all 3 people I look up to in this industry, and all 3 people I would love to have on the podcast. So if they're listening, I would love to have them on for sure. And then also, I guess, throwing a fourth one, Dan Patrick. Dan is someone I've never gotten to interview on the show before. And when it comes to interviews, he's the best. If you are someone that is trying to get into this industry and you want to learn how to do interviews the right way, listen to Dan Patrick. He's the best when it comes to interviews. The way he can just travel through conversations without making it seem like it's all the tough questions always. He's the best. So it would be those four, and they're probably four of the biggest names in sports media today. But those are the four I would love to have on.
Yeah, those four definitely have set the standard for sports talk show hosts, and many great interviews that they've had over their careers as well. Definitely would be really good to get those on the Whole Story podcast. So yes, if any of the four do happen to be listening, please get in contact with Alex and get on the Whole Story podcast. You're welcome to come on.
My email is in my Twitter bio, so
there you go.
You just gotta go over to Twitter, and it's right in there. You can click it.
There you go. And then also, if you're interested, also come on to the Schuby show. You can send a DM.
Exactly. So, my DMs are open. So
that's right.
Maybe we can do like if they don't want to do two podcasts, maybe we can do a joint podcast.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. Alex, also, as you are a fellow sports broadcaster, one of my questions that I don't always ask, but I should probably ask, who are some of your favorite play-by-play broadcasters, and maybe just broadcasters in general? Maybe if you have like a top 5 or just some of the ones that stick out to you. I mean, you can kind of go, I guess, by sport, maybe 2 or 3 from football, 2 or 3 from baseball, or you could just do a generalization too. It's up to you.
Sure. I think I'm at fault here. I love listening to broadcasters, but sometimes I don't listen to the broadcasters when I'm not broadcasting because I try my best. You can talk to, I think most of, if you ask any broadcaster these questions, you'll understand it, because when you listen to broadcast, it's hard to critique them in a way, or if it's like what you do anything. If you work at McDonald's and they're doing something wrong and you're watching them make it, you want to say something. So I think when listening to broadcasters, my favorites would be top of my list, John Sterling for play-by-play for the Yankees, just because he's the reason why I'm doing this in a way. In football, well, he does really everything, but honestly, I love Joe Buck. I'm a Joe Buck fan.
Thank you.
I love, it's to be said, right? That he's the best. For someone that can go from calling a postseason World Series baseball game to then call an NFL game the next day, and him sound as prepared as anyone could be, is incredible. And it speaks very highly of him. He could, right after that football game, he can go back to calling baseball, no problem. It's incredible what he's able to do. I love Joe Buck. John Sterling, like I said. Bob Costas is incredible when it comes to broadcasting. The way he can almost just add captions to moments out of nowhere, because you can't predict moments in sports if they're not underlined. Right, going into the game, a storyline. But a moment that happens in a game, he's one of the best at adding the captions to it, adding that soundtrack that you'll listen to 20, 30 years later. And then I guess the last one I'll throw out there, who is the GOAT of broadcasting, is Vin Scully. There's no one better than Vin. And he's just such an incredible broadcaster, an incredible storyteller. His way of telling stories throughout the broadcast is the best. So I guess those are my four. All a little different. All one. I wish I could sit down at the table and with all four of them. And that would be an interesting conversation to have with all four of them between Buck, Sterling, Costas, and Scully. But it's one that I think fans would love to listen to, and I think fans truly love, even if they won't admit it with Buck, I think they truly love all of those broadcasters.
Yeah, I really, really like that list. Joe Buck is my favorite broadcaster in the industry. I think he does a great job. And if you haven't looked at my Twitter bio recently, I did add Joe Buck apologist in there because I know there's a lot of people that will attack Joe Buck for this or that or the other thing. I know a lot of Vikings fans are still upset about the Randy Moss mooning thing, but you know what? Just get over it already. Joe Buck is one of the best broadcasters in the game. There's a reason why he's the number one guy at Fox right now. So you could throw aside the idea of nepotism there, I think, too. I mean, yes, that's probably part of the reason he got his start in the industry, but he's had to earn the spot that he has at Fox right now, and he's done a great job of doing that as the lead guy there. So, and of course, as you said, Bob Costas and Vince Scully, both of them phenomenal storytellers. They both do a great job of doing that. They've had some really outstanding moments in their careers as well. And Vince Scully, of course, just one of the legends in not only just in broadcasting, but just in the sports industry. Had so many years of calling Dodger baseball, and truly one of the great guys in the game.
And the beauty about Vin is, he's not really talked about. When you think Vin Scully, obviously the first thought that comes into mind was the Dodgers, but he also had an ability to call really any other sport successfully. And that's incredible. You have to be well diverse in this industry, and you have to be able to, you want to be really successful in this industry, you have to be able to do a little of everything, and Vin was definitely one of those.
Yeah, an incredible career for Vin Scully, and of course we wish him nothing but the best in his retirement years as well. Alex, we're kind of getting towards the end of things here for the podcast, but kind of want to shout you out on Twitter here before we end this as well. You can follow Alex Feuz on Twitter at Alex Feuz, and that's Feuz. And Alex, I know we had this talk already about your last name and how you have a pet peeve of that. Of course, as broadcasters, we always want to pronounce names correctly. Just give us maybe a story maybe of how somebody pronounced your name incorrectly and how that came about potentially.
Let's see. I would say, it's been Feuz or Feuz, or it's spelled wrong so much. I think it's spelled wrong more than incorrectly pronounced. It's always spelled Feuz instead of Feuz. So what I always tell people, it's Fe, not Fu. So that's what I always tell people. And once I tell them that, they'll never forget it, I hope. So I always say it's Fe, not Fu. But if you do Fu. I guess that would be my way of if you don't know me, I do have a sense of humor. I guess that's one thing that one of my favorite questions to ask someone is like, what's one thing that people think you are that you are not? And I don't think people realize, it's hard to come off funny on Twitter, and when you're interviewing people, it's hard to show some comedy sometimes. But I consider myself a funny person. In my opinion, I think my friends would disagree with me on that. But, that's my humor. That's my humor.
That's right. We different kinds of humor. Sometimes some people, like myself, at times, depending on the pun, I really enjoy puns, but sometimes they get to be a little bit too bad. Sometimes they can be really bad. Sometimes they're great. Sometimes they're just terrible.
But those are the best ones. Those are the best ones that are just terrible. And then I'll laugh at them 10 hours later.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And then, of course, then you got everybody else that just can't stand puns. I think honestly, Alex, if we asked them honestly, I think somewhere deep down they would actually admit to liking puns. What do you think?
I think people hate to love them. I think that's the reason why some people just hate puns. And I think, honestly, maybe they're just not that, I think it takes a special person to like a pun. And if you don't like puns, I don't think we can really be friends, honestly. If you hate puns, I think you hate the world. So, it's a little humor. Add a little humor. Add a laugh. Don't be a hater. Have some puns. Puns are punny.
That's right.
That's my logic behind puns, and dad jokes are the best. I love some good dad jokes, but for sure, I wish more people liked puns, and I think the people that hated puns, deep down inside, they truly like them. They truly like them.
That's right. We need to take some advice from the Joker and not take life so seriously. Why so serious, Have a little fun. Lighten up a little bit.
Fun. Exactly. Especially right now. You can always a good joke can go a long way, especially now.
That's right. That's right. Not too many other things would I suggest taking advice from the Joker on, but, that would probably be the one thing.
Exactly. It's a good advice. Good advice.
Well, Alex, it's been a lot of fun to have you on the podcast today. Do you have any other last-minute thoughts before we head out? And also, I guess one thing I was going to ask you before we get to that, what advice do you have for other young broadcasters or broadcasters in general about the broadcasting field? Any advice on game preparation or career, any of those types of things?
Well, I would say it's one that I tell people all the time. It's, if you are in high school and you think you have an interest, but let's say I really like broadcasting or have an interest in that, but I play football or basketball, soccer, baseball, softball, whatever the sport is, still do it. All throughout high school, I still did my podcast, and I was also the team manager of my high school baseball team all 4 years, and I was the team manager of my high school football, basketball, and soccer team for 2 years. And no matter what, there was a season for me to stay busy, and I still did the podcast. So if you play those sports and you still do that, still create a podcast, test it out, find out early on if this is truly what you want to do. I would say just get started. Reach out to people in the industry. Anyone can I do better what I did. It's no fault to anyone. You can email anyone. They might not get back to you. They might just say follow up in 6 months, and the key to that is follow up in 6 months. So you got to stay persistent as well in this industry. It's all about just honestly starting, because you control your own path. If you graduate college, you're not going to have ESPN calling you the next day. That's just not the reality.
That's a fact.
Exactly. Right. So
spoken from personal experience.
Right. So you're going to be entering this kind of unknown, right? Of, okay, what is next? But be persistent. Send some of the best pieces of advice, and that's basically how I got my gig in Burlington this summer, was I sent an email to every single minor league baseball team on January 6th, and Burlington got back to me in 2 minutes, and I had the gig in less than 48 hours after that blind email. It's about playing the numbers game. It's basic odds, right? If you send an email to 300 places that you have an interest of interning at, you're going to tell me there's not one opportunity at those 300 places. So you have to put yourself out there, put your name out there, build a brand. But starting out, I would just say, just start. You control your own destiny. It sounds cliche, but in the sports industry, it's not. And that would be my advice to anyone.
Yeah, that's some good advice for all you young broadcasters, including myself, to just get started in whatever you want to do. If you're in the broadcasting industry, do something about it. Don't just sit around, especially during quarantine. Make a podcast, work on your craft. Even if it's not a big podcast or doesn't end up being as big as you would
Right.
hope,
No.
it's a good opportunity to work on your interview skills and just kind of
Yep.
hone in on your craft.
Exactly. And no matter what project I do, I never really look to it as, oh my gosh, why aren't 2,000 people listening to this? I honestly do not care about, I care about the people listening, but I don't care how many people are listening because that's not why I'm doing it. And I think, honestly, Carson, a lot of people, what they don't realize is they think podcasting is easy, and they think, 3 weeks in, oh my gosh, why is no one listening? What good podcasts typically, or I guess you should say, what podcasts do you listen to right from the start? Maybe friends and family do, but any podcast that I started listening to has already been around for at least a year. At least a year. So maybe 6 months. It's dependent. I listen to I'm bad when it comes to listening to podcasts. I actually don't listen to a lot of them, but I do listen to podcasts if there's a guest on that is an interest to me. That's definitely how I gauge my podcast listening right now. I know it's bad. Some people are like, oh, like, do you listen to podcasting? And I'm like, not really, because in my free time, I kind of want to get away, as far away from sports sometimes and podcasts sometimes, because you surround yourself with it. I think about it all day long. But when it comes to listening to podcasts, I do any good podcast. It takes a while to develop. You have to develop your own. Find who you are as a broadcaster too. I guess that would be my advice. And it's to stay on top of it. If 3 weeks in no one's listening, do a fourth, do a fifth, do a sixth. If you're a year in and no one's listening to it, then I would say maybe try something different. Not different career-wise, but different with your podcast. What can I do different? Is there a different market I can hit? So I think that's why the Whole Story podcast is doing a little bit better than any other podcast I've done, is because it has a niche market, right? It's really made for broadcasters that have a love for it. And that's a niche market. That's a direct market. So I guess it's finding out, okay, what do I love and how can I continue to grow in this industry? I guess that would be my my advice for that.
Alex, it's been a lot of fun having you on the podcast today. Again, you all can follow Alex on Twitter at AlexFeuz. That's Feuz. And of course, Alex, you can listen to your podcast, the Whole Story podcast, and it's on iTunes. And where else can you find the Whole Story podcast?
The Whole Story podcast, I don't even know where you can find it. I always say it's on every single podcasting platform. That's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, I guess, right? Just the podcast app on any Apple product, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, YouTube if it's a video one. So that would be, I believe I'm not missing anyone out. And if I am, I'm sure we're on those as well. Literally, I think we're on every single podcast platform today.
There you go. So you should be able to find it. Yeah, you should be able to find it, the Whole Story podcast. And if not, you can always go to Alex Feuz on Twitter and find it under his bio. It's listed there. So you can definitely listen. If you're a broadcaster, even if you're just a sports fan, it's very interesting to hear some of the career stories of many of these broadcasters who bring you content of your favorite sports throughout the year. So, Alex, it's been a really good time having you on, and wish you nothing but the best throughout the rest of your career. Also wish your dad a speedy recovery from the battle he's got going on with cancer, and hope you continue to do well throughout this quarantine that we have that's hopefully coming to an end soon, but who knows?
Hopefully, that's right. But Carson, it's been a lot of fun. Thanks so much for having me.
And that is going to do it for the Schuby Show this week. Thanks for listening, and we will see you again next time.
Thanks for listening to The Schuby Show. We hope you mildly enjoyed yourself with more never-ending nonsense with yours truly. For more content, go to the website, theschubyshow.com. Get the show on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, YouTube, Stitcher, and TuneIn Radio. We'll see you next time.